is pertaining to a mystery illness pertaining to kids that is associated or connected with the coronavirus, COVID-19. Please listen to this. This could actually be something very, very alarming that would be a insult to injury of already looking at over 70,000 deaths, almost 75,000 deaths here in America alone. This just proves that the coronavirus itself, COVID-19, is in fact evolving. We need to listen and pay very close attention to this pertaining to our future, pertaining to our children. Please listen.
Strikes children and is believed to be linked to the coronavirus. Suspected cases have quadrupled here in New York City, leading health officials to issue an alert that calls for hospitals to report any similar cases. We're going to talk about all of it with Dr. John Torres in just a moment. But first, NBC's Kristen Dahlgren has the latest.
This morning, more details and more cases of a complication that can affect the heart and blood vessels of children that's been linked to COVID-19. Late Wednesday, the American Heart Association putting out an alert for pediatricians everywhere to be on the lookout for symptoms, as New York State announced they suspect at least 64 cases of what's being called pediatric multisystem inflammatory syndrome. New York now mandating hospitals must immediately report cases to the state.
Let's back that up. Right there.
Of what's being called pediatric multisystem
inflammatory
syndrome. New York now mandating hospitals must immediately report cases to the State Department of Health.
I understand why parents would be anxious. I think everybody should be. This is still a developing situation and we don't know all the facts.
The symptoms appear to be similar to two known diseases, Kawasaki disease and the more dangerous toxic shock syndrome, ranging from fever and rash to vomiting and diarrhea. Some children, like Jaden Hardawar, who is now recovered, even going into cardiac arrest.
Lord.
The syndrome is rare, but has been seen in Europe and several states in the U.S. The epicenter right now is New York.
We just admitted another 2 last night. I have 6 in my intensive care unit right now who fit this criteria, and these kids can be very ill.
While 2 studies from China and Europe now indicate children might spread the coronavirus, there's still a lot of unknowns. Experts warn kids across the country could be at risk for never-before-seen complications. Dr. Jane Newberger from Boston Children's Hospital says they've never seen anything like it.
Can we tell parents yet which children might be more prone to getting this?
I think we cannot yet give any intelligent information about which children will or will not develop the syndrome.
The timeline for when this inflammatory disease appears can be days to weeks after COVID symptoms, suggesting lingering effects and danger even after recovering from the virus. Kristen Dahlgren, NBC News, New York.
And to help us better understand this, we want to bring in our medical correspondent, Dr. John Torres. Dr. Torres, last time we spoke, which was, I think, just 3 days ago, New York had 15 cases. Now we're talking about 64 cases. We're talking about this new advisory. So I guess my first question is how concerned should parents be about this?
And Hoda, you're right. The cases have gone up dramatically over the last few days. Part of the reason behind that is because doctors are now reporting it in because it's something that they probably saw in their hospitals but didn't really know that other people were seeing it as well. So we're getting more of accumulation of this, but other cases are probably cropping up as well. And as far as concerned, I think parents need to be aware of what's going on, but not terribly concerned because worldwide we're still talking about under 200 cases. And so it's very, very rare it's happening in children, but at the same time it is very serious. So again, something they should probably be aware about, but not necessarily overly concerned about.
So we talked about some of the symptoms. We're talking about fever and rash, vomiting and diarrhea, abdominal pain. So what should parents look for, and how many of those do they have to have before they decide to take their child to the hospital?
So probably the biggest key to all these is the fever, and what we're talking about is 4+ days of fever, and that's what the New York State Department of Health is telling providers to look for, that 4+ days of fever in a row. On top of that, if you get fever with rash, that's even more concerning. And then the abdominal pain is something that tends to be unique, and I interviewed a girl last week, a 12-year-old, that had that. It's the only symptom she had before, unfortunately, she went to the hospital and her heart stopped. They were able to restart it, so she's doing well. But at the same time, that seems to be a unique symptom, and then that diarrhea and vomiting as well. And those are the things that parents need to look out for. If they see that in their child, especially if they recover from coronavirus at one point or had it earlier, they need to talk to their doctor.
So just, I'm kind of confused. Do these children, or have they had coronavirus?
The vast majority of children have tested positive for coronavirus. Some of them didn't test positive at the time, but later on had antibodies, and some have not tested positive for coronavirus. And that's why we keep saying it seems to be related to COVID-19, but we're still trying to figure out all those unknowns and exactly what's going on. There does seem to be a situation where their immune system goes kind of into overdrive and causes them to go into shock-type syndrome, which results in the organ failures we're talking about.
And let's talk about
This is crazy. This is absolutely crazy that anything could attack like this, the immune system. And like they're talking about, the system goes into overdrive that could actually cause them to go into coronary arrest. My God.
Immune system goes kind of into overdrive and causes them to go into shock-type syndrome, which results in the organ failures we're talking about.
And let's talk about transmission. And there are new studies out on how much of the virus kids transmit. And it's especially important now because, that we're talking about school coming back in the fall. So what do we know about that?
So that's a big thing here, making sure that everybody's safe when kids go back to school in the fall. And there's 2 different studies out. One is from Germany, and it found out that children have as much virus in their body, that viral load, as adults. In some cases, they have more of a viral load than adults, and that means they can transmit it to other people, even if they're asymptomatic. The second study was out of China, and they found out that even though children weren't as susceptible to coronavirus, when they went back to school, they had 3 times more contacts than adults did, and so their likelihood of spreading it is equal to adults. So now we know from these 2 different studies that they can have the virus in their body equal to adults. They can spread it as easily as adults can. So we need to be very careful when they go back to school and make sure that, number one, they're not getting sick, because that's extremely important, but also that they don't get the virus, bring it home, and get other people sick as well. Something we need to keep in mind once schools start reopening in the fall, and make sure we do it very, very well.
Yeah. All right. Dr. Torres, thanks for your expertise. We appreciate it.
Coming up next on this Thursday morning, are you still struggling to find disinfectant wipes and cleaners? Now, just ahead, a rare look inside one factory that's scrambling 24/7 to meet skyrocketing demand, and how soon they could be back in stock at your local stores. That's right after this.
These are extraordinary times. And
All right. Dr. Torres, thanks for your
Just ahead.
They don't get the virus. When they go back to school, and make sure that, number one, they're not getting sick, because that's extremely important, but also that they don't get the virus, bring it home, and get other people sick as well. Something we need to keep in mind once schools start reopening in the fall, and make sure we do it very, very well.
Yeah.
Now, how are parents that's got young kids going to be able to maintain and manage that? The only way that I can foresee that happening in a controlled environment would be for children not to go to school and for you to have school online. Because kids are going to be kids. I don't care if they're the best kids in the world. Kids are going to snatch, grab, pull, jerk on each other, because it's just part of being kids. They're going to touch. Kids are going to be kids. And you can't ask children not to be children by being in a classroom environment with a bunch of other kids. The only way that we're going to be able to do this is to have school online. You know, I've really looked deep at this. And I'm just not talking about the virus now affecting children, but the virus affecting almost 75,000 people here in the United States. And I done forgot now what the grand total is. I think it's well over 3 million people. And I'm a type of person that always looks at some sort of reasoning in behind the who, the what, the when, and the where. Questioning how come things occur the way that they occur. And of course the Bible talks about the sin of man. And the Bible talks about the sorrows that would be fallen upon to humanity. It also talks about the signs. The signs is a message that is being deployed from the sorrows that we as a society is supposed to pick up on and understand that these signs, which are deviated from sorrows, are happening for a reason. And it's really sad that so many people to this day still are not picking up on the signs. They're still not seeing the signs. And I know whenever you say sin, you're talking about generally speaking, using the word sin as some sort of metaphor. Well, let's just say, hypothetically speaking, that we're not talking about a metaphor. Let's say that we're talking about literal sin, okay, that has caused this to occur. Is it possible that because of the resistance movement against the windmill ministries that did not just begin here in Northwest Tennessee, but has been a movement throughout this country because of people being death phobia to the point of thinking that they're not going to die, has been brought into society to allow mankind to accept the fact that none of us are here, but only for a short period of time. Because Satan had done already deceived so many people in thinking that we're never going to die, and that because of the lifestyle that we was living of just enchanting the name Jesus Christ, we didn't have to worry about dying whenever God comes back, pertaining to the second coming of Christ, that we was all instantaneously going to vanish or disappear. This was nothing more than a mortal lie that had been handed down to humanity in the degree that the windmill ministries was basically never going to be able to obtain true supporters in its teachings for the past 30 plus years. And I guarantee you, the pillars of this area, Weakley County, Obion County, spreading out 10 counties wide in any direction, even up in Kentucky, I guarantee you there would have never have been anybody that physically made a telephone call or come to 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255, unless this pandemic set in the way that it set in this year. And I know that sounds horrible to a great deal of people's minds, including my own. But whenever Christ taught what Christ taught, during the time that Christ taught, you got to look at the facts. And the facts of what Christ taught was rejected. He was rejected to the degree that he was persecuted and put to death over. He was looked upon as being a renegade. And a renegade is someone who basically is a worthless human being, who has abandoned his own principles, who has abandoned his country, who has abandoned his family. And Jesus was just the very opposite of a renegade. If anything, Christ should have been looked upon as being a vagabond, but not a renegade. If the truth be known, those that should have been looked upon as being renegades should have been the ones that actually promoted the ideal of killing the Lord Jesus Christ. Because in their mental thinking and in their hearts, they actually felt intimidated and infuriated by the Lord coming onto the scene, because he was basically nothing more or less than a job hazard for a great deal of the priests and a great deal of the missionaries or the priesthood at that time that wanted that type of recognition to themselves. He was a job hazard. And they seen Jesus as him being an entity that was going to possibly be a job hazard in affecting their own personal positions that they so adored towards people, thanking them, oh Holy One, oh Righteous One, oh Gracious One, oh this, oh Father this, oh Father that. And of course, Jesus' teachings teaches against towards treating people in this degree. We're not supposed to call no man Father other than our Heavenly Father. So I've looked deeply at the message that come from the messenger 2,000 years ago that was rejected, that had a great deal of resistance, to the degree that they actually killed the individual that was in fact the messenger. Towards the today of my message being very, very similar in the degree that people had done already taken such of a cold, harsh stand against the Windmill Ministries that they was basically treating me as some sort of a renegade, treating me as I was the enemy and that they was the righteous ones. I had never experienced anything like what I had experienced until I come back to Northwest Tennessee. And it was one of the most saddest endeavors that I think any individual could ever went through, unless they themselves went through it, towards watching how that I was attacked, even soon to be at the age of 60 now, attacked again and again and again by people in their 20s and 30s and 40s that basically wanted to take me and wear me out, beat me to a pulp until there was not an ounce of life left into me, because in their eyes, I was not worthy of life. Though I had done absolutely nothing to these people. And I could mention at least on a dozen different fingers towards these people that was attacking me. Even Randy Brundridge, the mayor in Martin, Tennessee, First Baptist Church, as well as Central Baptist Church. I was under attack by these people, to the point of them telling me that I was no longer welcome in their same audience, that I could not come to any of their worship services. The same thing happened in other parts of the area around here, towards various churches that wanted to rise up and basically discriminate against me. In Jackson, Tennessee, it was one of the most awfulest scenes that I think that I'd ever experienced. After going to 2 or 3 different churches over 2 or 3 different times, and simply because I was using my camera to document these worshiping services, I was basically discriminated against and told don't never, ever come back. But yet now, 70% of all of their members, if they desired to want to pull out a camera and document the service, it was cool and it was fine and it was okay. The very thing that I was accused of right here in Central Baptist Church whenever I had my GoPro camera. And I was using my GoPro camera in documenting the services. I was told that that is not a cool thing to do. And then whenever I brought my camera in on my telephone, I was still told that's not a cool thing to do. Though 70% of all their membership done the exact same thing. I was actually kicked out of a church that I helped to build that is probably valued at somewhere around $7 to $10 million down in Jackson, Tennessee. Went there one time. And because I used the camera on my phone, after me telling various people or asking various people if it was okay for me to document the service, rudely told, don't never come back. Whenever you have a society that is so upside down, and I don't say this lightly because children has always been a very, very strong asset in my life because of what went on during our lives as children, being abused by a World War II drill sergeant. Whenever you see something this dramatic, you have to ask yourself the question, God, why the children? This lesson that we are supposed to learn is going to be a very sensitive, it is going to be a very harsh, it is going to be a very dramatic message for us all to take hold of and to learn from because of what is going on here. But whenever you have a ministry that has been attacked the way that the Windmill Ministry here at 291 Thompson Road has been attacked, it's pretty obvious that these great sorrows, these great mystery type diseases that are falling upon the humanity are not falling upon the humanity out of coincidence. These things are happening for a purpose or a reason. Now, if we as a society are not smart enough to identify that reasoning and behind why that this has occurred, then shame on us, not just the first time, but shame on us even the second time. I have devoted over half of my life in this calling that God has placed up into my life, that even to this day, the vast majority of the people around in this neighborhood are still in denial of. And the reason why that they're still in denial of is because this is the point of origin of where the resistance movement ever started to begin with, was right here in Northwest Tennessee. These was the people that analyzed the message coming from the messenger, and these was the very people that attacked the messenger because they did not like the message. Similar towards the way that they done the very Lord and Savior Jesus Christ over 2,000 years ago, by treating him like he was some sort of I'm trying to think of another word other than a renegade. Like he was some sort of misfit coming into society. And the whole time Jesus was trying to help those people 2,000 years ago. That the priesthood and the rabbis and the teachers of that sector rejected, because there was a resistance movement at that time against the message. The thing about my message, it's not my message. It's a development from Jesus's message. And all I am is a spokesman for that very message. I didn't design the King James Version Bible. I didn't write it. I didn't create it. I'm just coming into it towards teaching the latter part of it. And according to the scriptures, it does say that the last part of Jesus' ministry, because regardless of what name that I use, it's still Jesus' ministry. You can call whatever ministry you want to call it. You can call it Billy Graham's ministry. You can call it Oral Roberts' ministry. You can call it Joe Osteen's ministry. You can call it Pat Robinson's ministry. You can call it Jimmy Swaggart's ministry. But the fact of the matter is, it is still based upon the cornerstone of Jesus Christ's ministry, regardless of what name that you may tag up onto the name of the ministry. So, by me ushering in this message of not only John 3:16, but also the end time developments of the opening of the seals pertaining to the righteous judgment of God coming upon to society, this is not of my doings, other than me being simply the spokesman or the messenger that's delivering the message. It's really sad that it has taken this type of tactic to finally get people to stop and recognize that just maybe the individual that's talking to you right now by the name of Dennis James Juby Jackson may have pegged it right all along, in which I believe that I did. Why would I believe anything any differently? especially after devoting over half of my life into the very same message. Because as far as I am concerned, there has not been one iota that has changed in the developing research of this message today versus what it was whenever I first began over 30 plus years ago. Not one. In other words, the intelligence of the teachings that God gave me then towards what I was teaching then is still just as accurate to the point today as what it was 30 plus years ago. Now, there's been some scriptures. I ain't going to sit here and tell a big fib that there's been some scriptures that I've tweaked. There's been some scriptures that I've looked at in more depth because my knowledge has been broadened pertaining to what went on then versus now. You know, I hadn't started teaching about the low-lying areas that are more prone or susceptible of drowning pertaining to floods. And seeing islands basically swamped by hurricanes just until probably the past 5 or 6 years, to where God revealed to me, Dennis, this was what I was talking about whenever I told my people that in the last days to flee into the mountains. Flee into the mountains. In other words, go to a higher climate. Why was Christ telling his disciples, which if he was telling his disciples then, he's telling his disciples today to flee into the mountains? I believe it was for 2 reasons. One reason was because of the water table level. Whenever you're in a lower water table level, you're more susceptible of being flooded by water. And that can be right here inland. Because the way that we get rains is totally abnormal from the way that we used to get rains. Just the other day, it come a flash flood here, probably one of the worst ones that I've seen inland in this part of the area in a long, long time. The only rain that I can compare that was similar to it was down in Augusta. Not Augusta, but down in Texas, down on the coastline, whenever I was down there a few years ago, whenever it flooded about 8 inches of rain in less than 30 minutes. Right here in this area, we got about 4 inches of rain in about 30 minutes. That was a big rain for this area. But we're seeing more developing weather patterns like this to where we no longer just get a shower. We get a flood. We get a flood. So even though you're inland, you're just as apt of being flooded if you're not on top of the mountains. Flee into the mountains, as Jesus taught, as you are if you was way down on the coastal area or on an island somewhere because of a hurricane. Our weather patterns have changed, and they're changing drastically to the point that some places are getting entirely too much rain, while others are not getting enough. And they're basically becoming desolate to the point that it just turns into a major drought, like over in Syria, places like that. Just absolutely awful. Africa, places like that. I'm still basing my analogy off of the analogy of everything happens for a reason, based around the hard shell primitive Baptist teachings that what is to be will be, And if it's not meant to be, it won't be. In other words, God knows our lives even better than we know ourselves. And the scripture says that he even knows the very hairs on our head, of how many hairs are on our head. And I know that to a lot of people, that's almost impossible for them to wrap their minds around pertaining to who and what God really is. But that is how overwhelming that the Spirit of God is towards knowing all things about all people. So it just adds that much more misery and sorrow to my heart whenever I see children being affected by a disease that obviously is mutated, that obviously has come from the pits of hell. This disease that has now killed over 70,000 people here in the U.S. alone. And now it's not just affecting the adults, the elderly, but now it's affecting the children too as well. We as a society are going to have to wake up. And we're going to have to realize that these tactics, these brutal, hardcore tactics that are being used on society right now are being used on us for a reason. And we're going to have to wake up if we plan on surviving for the next generations to come. We're going to have to take these sorrows and these signs serious if there's going to be any hope for our future, for tomorrow, and for tomorrow's tomorrow, pertaining to our children and our kids that are some of the most adorable, loving, inspiring children of any generation that I've ever seen. They are absolutely on point whenever it comes to them understanding different things and having the knowledge of adults at the age of 8, 9, 10, 12 years old. Some of these kids, with their abilities to be able to run computers and to be able to know various things, is just absolutely overwhelming in their knowledge that they have. And the thing about their knowledge is that their knowledge is not being used because too much of the old is still affecting the new. So in a way, I kind of believe that all this is happening of out with the old, in with the new, that this is a way for God of purging this old way of thinking, this old concept way of doing things, and he's having to do it in a very abrupt, harsh, cruel way. And it's not a way that he finds pleasure in at all, because God has actually allowed for Satan to do this, to bring this type of remorse to humanity. How can we stop it? How can we reverse it? You got to look at it logically, that he says in the first 4 chapters of Revelations that he has not yet found our works perfect yet. Go back, indicating that there would be a door of opportunity to go back and do thy first works over again. In other words, reassign your heart towards understanding the difference between godly and ungodly. Because our religion that we believe in is not based around a free ticket, a get out of jail card, pertaining to being able to go out here and sin willfully and think that there's no consequences in doing so. Because there is. There is consequences in sin. And that's what God is trying to tell us. To wake up, to go back, and to get it better, to get it right. And if not, he would eventually remove thy candlestick, which is in fact the church. Not just one particular individual, but the whole church. He would eventually remove thy candlestick out of its place. And if you think that the devils are ruling now, once God completely takes all of his children out of this earth, and the devil is seeking havoc upon the society because he is the prince of this world, if you think that you're seeing crazy, harsh, ridiculous, mean, cruel things happening now, you ain't seen nothing yet. Whenever God pulls his precious Holy Spirit off of this planet or out of this planet, it will be an environment such as mankind has never, ever, ever experienced or seen before. Good luck to all of us. As some of us is fighting just a common allergy cold pertaining to the pollen, versus some of us are fighting for our lives. Good luck to each and every one of us. And may God have mercy on all of us. And may God bless the United States of America. Shalom.